Domain 7 is one of those domains that we have in CISSP that probably all of us would have some sort of direct or indirect experience. Okay. We will definitely, we could have done some of the bits and pieces in domain 7. Now, domain 7 is huge when it comes to the content, right? You probably, in case if you have started your preparation of CSSP, or if you know what kind of a content you have to cover, you would probably you would have probably picked up a book called as Official Study Guide, right? And that contains 4 chapters of that book, right? So out of 21 chapters, 4 chapters are from domain 7. So that's a huge content. So summarizing everything in detail in just 1 hour span uh, might not be practically possible, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly give you a walkthrough of high level understanding that we all need to know from an examination perspective, from a domain perspective, and we'll talk some of the context which is probably relevant to your preparation. All right. So as I spoke about, that there are 4 different domains that we have in 4 different chapters that we have. So let's consider it as a modules that we have to go through for domain 7. So the first of all, we'll talk about the security operation. These are the operational aspect that we have in your why exactly security operations is needed, why exactly we would need to have your some of the aspects around change management, configuration management, vulnerability management, and so on. Then we'll talk something about your incident response. It's a very, very crucial module that we have in domain 7. It's very important for a security professional to understand what exactly are the different type of incidents that we have and how do we address that. Then disaster recovery, a very important section again. This is an extension to your business continuity, which we cover in domain 1, the BCP. This is an extension to that, where we will execute some of the plans we build during the business continuity. And then finally, we'll conclude from forensic investigation perspective, some of the details that we have to follow under the forensic investigations. How do we conduct that? What are the crucial things that we need to handle when it comes to obtaining the evidences and some of the ethical practices? All right. Okay, let's get started with the security operations. It's very important to have a fundamental understanding of your basic terminologies. One should know, if you're preparing for domain 7, you should be familiar with some of the topics like your uh, what exactly are your certain policies around your separation of duties? What are your policies around your access control fundamentals? You should clearly know the difference between what's need to know and least privilege. These are the common terms that probably and often people get confused, right? So it's very important that we have that fundamental idea of need to know and least privilege. Need to know is always about why someone need access to a data. You should always have an answer to your why someone would need access to the data. Least privilege is once you have access to the data, you should make sure that the access must be provided based on the least privilege, which means the user should be able to perform least amount of activities based on their roles, responsibilities, their duties, and so on. So you should know why exactly an organization would need the policies around mandatory vacation, why exactly someone need a job rotation, why exactly we would need an aspect of physical security. So because the primary purpose of having a security operations in place is to safeguard or protect your assets, like your physical assets, your people, your digital assets, your data, everything. So you need to incorporate certain best practices around it. Then we will need to know about change management. Change management is a very important topic for your CSSP. The whole idea of change management is to make sure that when any kind of a change happens in the system, any change, that could be a change in the configuration, that could be a change in the let's say you're updating some kind of policies, you're updating some kind of a patches, you're making any change, that change has to go through a controlled environment, which means we cannot expect anyone to make a change that's not approved, that's not been tested, that's not been governed. So whenever you make any kind of a change, it's very important that you know why exactly this change is being done, who is going to make this change, what's the rationale for making the changes. It's very, very essential. It's important from an examination perspective that you should know the purpose of change management. It's important. The purpose of change management is to document the changes. It's very crucial, right? What would be the impact on the system if we don't make any changes as per the change management policies? It impacts the availability of the system. A lot of time people perceives that any unauthorized change should impact the integrity. How come unauthorized changes impacts the availability, right? See, when we say integrity, change or tampering of the any kind of a data, right? So integrity impact has to involve some kind of a data. But when we make a change, we do not touch any kind of a data on that, right? We don't have any changes on the data. We change the configuration, we update the hardware, we update the operating system. We never go at the layer of the data. That's the reason we don't have any impact on the integrity. Change in the system, any unauthorized change in the system might have an influence of integrity, but in some of the odd cases, primarily it will affect your availability. If you make a change in an unauthorized manner, something that is not governed, that will probably destroy the availability, right? So that's the reason change management is very, very essential. Someone need to request for the change, then people need to approve the change, then you need to have some kind of evidences, right? So in your examination, when you prepare for CISSP exam, it's very crucial to understand all the scenarios, because CISSP tests you on the real world situation. That what if you get a certain kind of a change that requires you to fix a critical vulnerability, and maybe one of your approvers are not available? How would you handle this, right? So this leads to some kind of an emergency change. So you might want to assess what kind of an impact it has, and then you need to think about, let's get the change rolling and we'll seek the approval retrospectively. So use your judgment. It's very, very crucial. Have a perfect balance of security versus business availability. Understand what is more important. Okay. So accordingly, you need to take the decision. Same happens with the configuration management. Configuration management is a sort of a subset of change management where you end up utilizing a configuration which is approved and advocated in the organization. Let's understand what's a configuration. You have an application, all right? And an application is nothing but bunch of codes. Is that enough for us to run an application? Probably not, right? Because an application would need some kind of an underlining libraries, binaries, access to the platform like your operating system, right? It has its own dependencies. These dependencies are nothing but, it's called as configuration. So it's very important that we have whatever the configuration that we are using. For example, if we are using an application that is compatible to Windows, right? That's a configuration we have. If you're if you're building an application that's built on Java or Python, that's the configuration you have. Because in order to run a Python application, you would need the Python libraries. If you want to run a Java application, you need to have the JRE files, you need to have the JDK environment, you need to have these kind of configurations. So if you're going to use certain configuration, make sure that it's in line with the organization's configuration management policies. And organization always or normally they do have these certain set of configurations that you're supposed to use. For example, an organization would say it's important that you use Oracle and SQL as a database. That's all. Why? What's wrong with, let's say, MongoDB? There's nothing wrong with MongoDB, right? It's a perfectly fine database. But an organization might not have evaluated MongoDB as a configuration in their organization. So it's important that we adhere to that. Otherwise, there are many different circumstances would happen that could put an organization at risk. Number one, people might end up using the configurations of their choice that's deviating from the advocated configurations, and no one has evaluated that. That's a concern. That's a security concern. What if someone is using an unstable configuration? Let's say you are using JDK 1.7 or Log4j 2.15 or TLS 1.1. These are the configurations which have the known vulnerabilities. If we don't have a configuration management process, we will not be able to evaluate that. This also leads to a concern of shadow IT. Shadow IT is a kind of a concern, you probably might have heard about it, where people end up using the configurations of the technologies without letting anyone know about it. So IT team doesn't know about it. Security team doesn't know about it. Procurement doesn't know about it. So I want to use a particular cloud based service. I simply used my credit card information and started using that. That's all. And nobody knows about it. But there is an instance of cloud running in the environment, and there's a workload that's running in that particular cloud. So that this could be a substantial risk. So it's very important that we have a configuration management policies. Then about the patch management. A patch is, so when we say patch, we are talking about the security patches. So a patch is when there is a kind of a security vulnerability on in your product. Now that could be a vendor-based product or any kind of an open source product. A fix that you apply to fix that vulnerability, any kind of an update that you use to fix that vulnerability, that's what we call as a patch. An organization must have a very effective patch management process, right? So whenever any kind of a vulnerability that has been identified, now either you identify as your organization that someone reported a security concern, or maybe a vendor proactively tells you that there is a vulnerability out there. You need to evaluate, you need to assess a scenario, how you can fix it. So if you are using a vendor specific product, something for which you have paid the license fee, right? You can easily rely on the vendor for providing you the patches. But as an organization, you need to have a very good relationship with your suppliers, with your vendors, so that you get these patches in a timely manner. Or in case if the patches are not available, you can at least get a workaround till the time you have a permanent fix. You can have a interim solution that can be deployed that could avoid any kind of a security breaches. All right. So it's very important that you have a proper and effective patch management process that will help you in dealing with a lot of security concerns, including any kind of a 0-day vulnerabilities. 0-day is a type of a vulnerability, something that has not been reported yet, or maybe it has been found, but there is no as such patch available. So you might want to, so I don't think we have forgotten how Log4j happened in the year 2021, right? Towards the end. So how an organizations, because it was an open source JNDA component, so organizations were struggling to find out a solution. And then it was a collaborative effort from the community where they started finding out a solution to it. But it went through multiple iterations. So it was only possible because of a strong patch management policies that organizations manage to curate. Then, of course, vulnerability management. It's very important to analyze any kind of a vulnerabilities in the particular organization, scan it constantly, have a constant scan, find out where exactly your weaknesses are, find out where exactly you don't have adequate controls, and accordingly make sure that you assess the vulnerabilities. So vulnerability management includes two important processes. Number one, finding out the weakness that you can do through the scanning process, but the scanners are going to help you in finding out the known weaknesses, like something which is known to them. It's a signature based, right? Most of the vulnerability scanners that you use, like Rapid7 or Qualys or Foundstone or Nessus, they all have these signatures of vulnerabilities. So they are going to help you in identifying something which is known to them, which is again a good thing. But it's important that once you have identified the vulnerabilities, you probably use the matrices like your CVSS, the scores, this common vulnerability scoring system that you have, that will tell you how good, bad, ugly the vulnerability looks like, right? If it is something that has a CVSS of 10, oh yes, definitely you might want to fix that as quickly as possible. Something that has a CVSS of 1, oh well, there's no need of any hue and cry. There's no need of panic. Oh, this is something which is informational. This can be fixed as at its own convenience. We don't have to cause any kind of a panic kind of a situation. But these cores can also help you in building a patch management process for yourself. For example, if you have a CVSS of 10 that you identified during the scan, but that system doesn't hold any confidential data, that system doesn't hold anything sensitive, that is accessed internally, hosted internally, do we have to cause panic situation? Well, not necessarily. That's an isolated system, doesn't have anything sensitive, accessed internally, hosted internally. That should be fine, right? However, if you have a CVSS of 7 or 8, but that hosts highly confidential data that has that's hosted in your, maybe let's say DMZ, or maybe in public cloud, and that's been accessed by external people. Oh yes, we should have a better and effective patch management process. So these cores will help you in building the contextual patch management policies around, right? So that's very, very important. Okay, let's move to the next module, which we're going to talk about your incident response. It's very, very important that we have important and effective incident response steps. So the content that's been given in your textbooks, like your official study guide, that is not only relevant for your CISSP exam, but that's also relevant for your real world scenario of handling the incidents if you have. So it starts with the process of detecting the incident, responding to it, mitigating it, reporting it, recovering the systems or recovering any kind of impacted devices, and then performing the remediation and then lesson learned. These are the steps. And for your CISSP exam, it's important that you need to remember the sequence. Not that you're going to get any kind of a straightforward question, what happens next after response. You are not going to get any kind of a questions like this. But it is important to know the steps to solve some kind of a contextual questions, right? Although I am not at all a big fan of asking people to memorize anything, but this could be important. So make sure when you're preparing for CISSP exam and you're looking at incident response as a chapter, it is very important that you know the sequence of it. Because you might get a scenario that you as a security engineer or a security analyst, you're looking at some of the incidents, you figured it out that, oh, it's a DOS attack or it's a malware intrusion, right? And because it was a DOS attack, you blocked that source IP at your firewall, or maybe you created a rule in your IPS. So you managed to detect it, you managed to respond it. What's the next thing that you should be doing it? Now, unless you don't know the sequence, it will be very difficult for you to present, right? So it will be very difficult for you to find out, like, should we report it or should we recover the system? Should we do the root cause analysis? So it's very important that you know the sequence, right? It's gonna be very, very useful. It's also important that you know different kind of threats, because as a CISSP professionals in your real world, you should be or you would be tasked to handle some of the security breaches, right? Some of us as an ad hoc job, some of you might be working in SOC, some of you might be working in different domains that requires you to address certain real-time threats. And you can only do that when you have an ability to recognize it. So you should know what exactly DOS attack looks like. What are the different types of DOS that we have? What exactly are the, like a SYN flood attack? What exactly is the teardrop attack? What's the Smurf? What's the Fraggle? What's a Loki attack? All those different kind of a threat vectors that happens, like your privilege escalation, your you have your dumpster diving, plenty of the things, right? These are some of the attacks that I could probably recall quickly. That's important for your for your preparation, but there could be tons of other attack vectors, right? You should know some of the, like OWASP top 10, the web application, right? Vulnerabilities that you have, some of the social engineering attacks that you have, some of the password and access control attacks. It's very, very important that you know these kind of threats, right? Some of the basic preventive and detective measures that you have. So you have intrusion detection system, you have intrusion prevention system. You should know what's a host-based IDS IPS, what's a network-based IDS IPS. You should know the difference between what's a pattern-based or a knowledge-based IDS IP and what's a heuristic IDS IPS. What's the difference between these two? In which scenario, what kind of an IDS IPS would be more useful, right? So these kind of different scenarios you should be preparing yourself. What's a honeypot? Honeypot is a great preventive tool that you have, or probably you can use it for detecting any kind of a breaches, right? So honeypot is a deceptive tool. You place it in your network, it makes it look like it's a real network, but it doesn't have anything real. You put some of the vulnerabilities deliberately there just for an attacker to spend some time, try and compromise anything, but they're not successful, right? So it's very important that you understand what are the honeypots, then find out what are the best practices for hardening the system. So you might want to know that, okay, so if there is a system that you want to harden, you do not want to open any unnecessary ports, services, disable any kind of a firewall rules, have up-to-date patches, policies, have a best up-to-date antivirus software, have a proper configuration management. These are some of the basic preventive measures that you can apply when it comes to system hardening. Threat intel, very important. What exactly is a threat intel? Why do you want to do a threat intel? Why you want to have a threat intel as a process? The purpose. See, whole idea of CISSP is to find out the why. The whole conventional idea of CISSP is to think from a management perspective. Nobody is going to test you on the capabilities of configuring anything from a technical perspective. That's a very wrong misconception or a notion that has been brought in, that CISSP is a highly technical certification. It's not. It's a purely management certification that we have. It requires you to have an understanding of a threat at an enterprise level. If you understand any kind of a threat at an enterprise level, how it will affect your business processes, how you would convey the message to the absolutely zero technical people like your board members, that's a kind of a fundamental understanding. And that's where a lot of people struggle, because majority of us come from a technical background. We have been working on firewalls, we've been working on IDS, IPS, people dealing with various kind of a risk aspect. The very first thing that comes to our mind is to solve the problem, but that's not what CISSP is all about. It's about how do we find out a solution that's going to be the best, as well as it's not going to put a lot of load in our pockets, which means budget friendly, something that's going to be a very cost effective solution. So think from that perspective. So threat intel is a great topic that you have. Threat intel allows you to find out various kind of threats proactively. You prepare your organization's defense mechanism from the threats that existed but we were not aware of. So, what are the different types of threat intelligence that we have? Like you have tactical threat intel, where you look into the IOCs, indicator of compromises. Then you have the operational threat intel, where you know about the tools, technologies, procedures used by the threat actors. Then you have the strategic threat intel, where you look into the high level organization strategy, how exactly that can possess a threat. Then benefits of threat intel, right? Like it helps you in taking informed decision while you're handling to the security breaches. It helps in improvising and elevating your risk management capabilities. Plenty of the things that you can utilize when you have a good threat intel practices. Auditing to assess the effectiveness of your organization. So auditing we always do, we conduct to find out how well we are doing, as well as it's required for us to showcase to showcase the commitment that we have towards security. So whenever, let's say you were going to conduct a business with some of your partners or some of your stakeholders, how would you provide them an assurance that when they're going to do the business with you, when they're going to have the business transaction or conduct a business with you, how will you assure them that your data with us is going to be secure? When you showcase the audit reports to them, you showcase the complete audit report that, hey, we went through some kind of a annual audit or maybe regulatory audit, and this is what we have done. And this report shows that we did not have any kind of a massive control gaps. Sometimes you might want to get yourself audited because it's a regulatory requirement. So these auditing methods tell how well you have been managing your security operations. All right. Okay. Let's move ahead to the third chapter of your security operation, and that's my personal favorite, which is your disaster recovery. A disaster recovery is an extension to your BCP. So all those plans that you prepared in your business continuity, you're now going to execute these plans. So I normally, a lot of people often ask the question, what's the difference between BCP and DR? And that's a very good question. Unfortunately, you don't need to know that kind of a minute differences for your CISSP, but that's a very good thought process that's gonna prepare you, right? So BCP is more around making sure that how would you continue to operate in case if there are any adverse events, if there are any disasters, if there are any impact on the business, how would you make sure that you continue to operate? That's the plan you build. That's the thought process you build during BCP. Disaster recovery is an aftermath of a disaster. Disaster recovery is an afterthought. Once the disaster happens, how do you recover yourself from the disaster? So think about, you are asking yourself a question that, what if tomorrow sky is going to fall? Where do we run? Where do we hide? How do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our business? How do we make sure that we continue to provide the services to our customers? A disaster recovery would be, oh, now the sky has fallen. How do I put it back to its right place? Right? So it's an afterthought of the disaster. So BCP normally talks about protecting your people, process, technology. Disaster recovery primarily focuses on technology. And of course, people are always there. People need to be protected. That's the first priority that you have. But it it widens more around the technology part, right? You have a DR for your system, you have a DR for your server, you have a DR for your storage. You don't have the BCP for these things, right? So it's more around the technical aspects. All right. Now, so it's very important for us to know what are the different types of disaster that we have. Man-made. Man-made disasters are something which are instigated by humans, like a fire, strike, looting, vandalism, hacking attempts, all these other man-made disasters. Then you have natural disasters, something that occurs naturally. These are the natural calamities that you have. So you have your floods, earthquakes, hurricane, cyclone, tornadoes, avalanche, pandemic, right? These are the different natural disasters. So it's very important that we know what are the different disasters. And then we also need to have the measures to identify the critical systems, which we already do during the business continuity. So business continuity has a very important step, which we call it as a BIA, business impact assessment. So we use the BIA to find out what exactly are the critical systems. We use the matrices like your maximum tolerable downtime, recovery time objective, recovery point objective. These are some of the important terminologies that you should be aware if you're preparing for CISSP. You should understand the implications of maximum tolerable downtime, RTO, RPO. What are the various measures we can take to reduce the RTO, RPO, and so on, right? It's very, very essential. Then we also need to think about what are the different type of alternate processing sites. So what's a hot site? What's a cold site? What's a warm site? This is a very crucial topic for your CISSP. In what occasion you can use a cold site? In what occasions you can use a hot site, right? Or probably why would you need a mobile site? What exactly is the benefit of having a redundant site, right? What are the characteristics of a reciprocal agreement? That's a mutual assistance agreement that you have, that you sign up with the organization, where both the parties are going to benefit each other. What kind of a contract that goes in reciprocal agreement? You need to think about, like, oh, we don't sign an SLA, we sign MOU, memorandum of understanding, right? Because it requires to have the same sort of infrastructure. So it's probably better to have the reciprocal agreement between two different organizations who shares the same parent organization, right? For example, Facebook and WhatsApp. Their parent organization is same, Meta, right? So these are the ideal use cases for having your your reciprocal agreement. What cloud is now being used as a great BCP DR solution. So cloud as a DR, we have a DR as a service, disaster recovery as a service. What are the various use cases you can think about? Cloud, because it have the best availability, it has the like pay-per-use model. You only pay for the services what you're leveraging, nothing more, nothing less. So that's a great alternative there. Then you have a different type of backups. You have your full backup, you have your differential backup, you have an incremental backup. That's very, very essential to know what kind of a backup is suitable in what scenario. If you want to have a quickest backup, probably incremental backup would be best. If you want to have a quickest restoration, probably differential and full backup would be best, right? How many disks you would need if you want to recover your data for entire week. Now, these are some of the use cases, right? Why, or probably what's the significance of parity bit in your backup strategy? When you restore the data, when you take a backup of the data, it's always good practice to test the restoration, right? It's very important that you keep on testing the restoration to avoid any last minute surprises or shocks, because you've taken the backup. Well, great job, phenomenal. But did you try to test the restoration? Did you try and restore the data? Is it working or not? Because of, if you don't do it, and one fine day when you need the backup and the backup is not working. So always it's a good practice to incorporate the testing of the restoration. No matter what, always stick to the DR procedure. Always. It's very, very essential. Stick to the procedure. Even if you know what needs to be done, even if you're aware what is required, stick to the procedure, because your DR plan that you've created, that's been finalized, that's been formalized post multiple iterations of tests. That brings us to the DR test. So they are majorly 5 high-level tests, I think. So you have your read-through test, then you have a structured walkthrough, which is also called as a tabletop exercise. Then you have the simulation test, parallel test, and the full interruption test. In what situation, what scenario you would perform what kind of a testing, right? Full interruption test, best gaps can be identified, right? That's the best test you can perform. But again, that's a test that management is mostly reluctant, right? Because nobody would allow you to perform a full interruption test just like that, because the risk of outage is huge, right? So it's very important to understand. Now, where do you keep the DR plan? Should you keep it in a primary side? Should you keep it on a DR side? These are the key kind of things you need to think about. All right. So that's your disaster recovery. That brings us to the last chapter, which is forensic investigation and ethics. Now, although this module is very, very small, teeny tiny module, uh, but it actually contains some of the key elements that's going to be very important for your CISSP exam, right? Now, forensic investigation is a crucial part whenever any kind of a breach happens, any kind of a computer associated crime happens. Now, what's a computer associated crime? Anywhere when computer was involved as a medium and or a target of a crime. For example, your denial of service attack. That's a computer associated crime. That's a computer-related crime, isn't it? Because computer was used as a medium of crime as well as it was used as a target of the crime. So it's very important that whenever any kind of a computer breaches or the cyber breaches happens, the forensic investigation is a very key element. One of the toughest jobs, one of the toughest forensic investigation that belongs, the category is your computer related crimes. Because these evidence collection process is such a tricky job because these evidences are not always tangible. These evidences are not always the materialistic or the real evidences that you can bring into the courtroom. These evidences could be in the form of data, in the form of an image, in the form of the electrical charges. That's very difficult to collect and even produce in a tangible form to the courtroom. So it's very important that we understand different type of investigations that we have, the criminal investigation, the civil investigation that you have, and how do you collect the evidence. Now, evidence collection process, like I said, it's a very tricky process. Now, you want to collect the evidences, especially the network logs. Logs are the crucial evidences that you can serve in the courtroom. But again, these logs have to be authenticated by the administrative accounts in order to make it admissible. So log files is a type of a testimonial evidence, right? But it cannot be admitted in the courtroom if it is not extracted by the administrative accounts. So these are some of the key clauses around the admissible evidences you have to think about, right? Then a great deal of precaution you need to take when you're collecting the evidences from real memory, let's say RAM, right? RAM, you probably might have read in domain 3 that RAM is a volatile memory, which means the data is gonna get deleted the moment you stop the power supply. That's a volatile memory because the data in the RAM is stored in the form of electric voltage. So the moment you turn off your power, your data is gone. Now, for any kind of a computer that has been subjected to a criminal activity, the RAM is going to contain a lot of crucial evidence because that was being used as an active memory. So you do not want to accidentally or intentionally turn off your computer system. Because the moment you turn it off, your crucial evidence is gone, right? So it's very important that you have a proper evidence collection process. So there's a section in your textbooks called as e-discovery, electronic discovery. It's a systematic process to obtain and extract the evidence from any electronic media that you have. Chain of custody is very crucial. It's very important. Chain of custody simply talks about the audit trail that you have maintained for everyone, for every individual who had the evidence in their custody, in their possession. So, for example, someone saw the evidence. What was the date? What was the time? What was the name of a person? And what was the state of the evidence? Who saw that? And then someone collected it. That needs to be documented. Someone is examining it. That needs to be documented. Then someone is presenting it to the courtroom. That needs to be documented. And when you submit a evidence in the courtroom, along with that, you also need to submit a chain of custody. If you fail to submit a chain of custody, that evidence is inadmissible. If there is any kind of a break in the chain of custody, that evidence is inadmissible. Because in terms of evidence, the most important thing is integrity, right? Because if there is any kind of a tampering of the evidence, that evidence will not be acceptable. You probably learn a lot from movies or the web shows, right? There are a lot of crime thrilled cinema that you probably watch, Hollywood, Bollywood, or web series if you're a fan of. You would learn a lot if you have been watching these. For example, let's say if you watched Suits, right? Harvey Specter, Mike Cross, Louis Litt. So in case if you watch that series, you probably know a lot about different kind of an investigation that happens and what's the chain of custody and everything. Then it comes to IC2 Code of Ethics. That's crucial. That's important. Now, this is the same code of ethics that you that you sign it off when you register for your exam. This is also a very important topic in your examination. Probably one of the topics that people can assure you that you will maybe you see this topic in your exam as well, right? That's a very, very high probability that this particular topic will be testable. Code of ethics is how, so when you are a member of IC2, it's very important that you never ever leave your ethical ground under any circumstances. So how do you behave ethically, right? So it has a preamble, which means it has a motto, and it has a four canons, right? So so the first canon is about protect the society, the common good, the welfare of the society, which means if it simply talks about that your actions should be towards the favor and the protection of the people in the society. Second one is your act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. So, which means your actions should maintain the highest level of integrity. Third is protect the principles, service principle, which means whatever the organization that you are working for, as a contractor, as an advisor, as a consultant, as a full-time executive, as an employee, your job should be to protect the particular organization. And the fourth canon, which is very important, is your advance and protect profession. So once you pass the CISSP, not necessarily that you need to take a webinar like that. Of course, if you do that, that's amazing, outstanding job. Not necessarily that you have to go ahead and start writing a book, or you can do these things. But the whole idea of advancing the profession is to make sure that you assist people in terms of obtaining the security knowledge. Now, that could be a basic thing. You can go ahead and reach out to a school, a college. You can just deliver a session about what are the security best practices that we have with the modern technologies like your AI. A lot of kids nowadays who are getting introduced to social media, access to internet is inevitable nowadays. Everybody has access to internet. How would you make sure that their safety, their privacy is being considered? I mean, the generation before us, right? Like my parents, your parents, uh, they didn't had this kind of an exposure to technology. Probably they might be victim to a lot of social engineering attempts. So it's very important that you educate them. It doesn't necessarily have to be writing down questions for CISSP. So this is how you can advance the profession. And protecting the profession means, so CISSP has been there into this industry for close to 31 years now. They have been able to maintain the integrity of this certification to the are I've never seen any other certification maintaining the level of integrity that IC2 has maintained. And the only reason they have been able to do it because the members are very diligent. So when you pass the CISSP exam, you do not want to get into the discussions like, hey, can you share me your questions you saw in the examination? Trust me, none of those things will work. A lot of people might want to digress you to use some of the examination dumps. Trust me, those examination dumps are not the examination questions. I used to work with IC2 as a contractor, helping them in developing their examination materials. I know how these people work. You cannot have anything what we call that as an examination dumps. So it's very important that you don't get yourself into these kind of a discussion about finding out an easy way of success. It's all about making sure that you study hard, make your notes, and find the credible sources, and then go ahead for the examination. That's the old school sure shot way to success. Nothing else will work. All right. Okay. Well, I think this is where I conclude my presentation.